In 1950, in a small town known as Cayuga, Everett, a teenager, and the town's radio host helps prepare for a high school basketball match. He has his friend Benny carry the spinner to the table that was set up, and gets Sam to plug it in to check if it's working. He meets Faye, who asks him to show her how her brand new tape recorder works, so they test the new device together, while he walks her to her job as a switchboard operator, and after he drops Faye off, Everett hurries to the night shift at the WOTW radio station. Inside the building, Faye meets Bertsy and tells her that she got her tape recorder and that she and Everett recorded themselves all the way there from school. Bertsy finishes her shift and leaves the seat for Faye. Before she leaves, Faye asks her if the lights were flickering there at all because they have been in school, but she tells him that they haven't been. Alone, Faye opens the radio so she can catch Everett's show, which is suddenly interrupted by a mysterious audio signal. Faye gets a call about a strange wind-like phenomenon from the sky, and she starts checking the other lines, but hears the same signal over the phone line. Feeling a bit apprehensive, Faye calls Grace and asks her to go over to Ethel and Maddie's house to check if they're okay. After her call, she realizes that the radio had started to work again, and she hears Everett's smooth voice coming through. Believing that she should inform him, Faye calls Everett and he picks up thinking that it was a caller, and she asks him not to be mad at her and tells him that another signal had interrupted his show during the start of the news. She connects him to the line the sound was playing on because she thought that he might know what it was, but he had no idea what the sound was. Everett then plays back his show, and Faye excitedly tells him that that was the sound when she hears it. Everett's surprised and tells Faye that it's foreign and the Air Force might come to town. Faye is curious if they might get into trouble, but Everett assures her that they haven't done anything. He asks Faye to send him the signal so he could put it in the air, and if anyone hears it and knows what it is, they would contact him then and they'd figure it out. Faye is skeptical and asks him whether this could get them in trouble, but he's adamant about his decision. He warns her not to call him back for at least 10 minutes so that anyone with information can get through while the signal plays. Faye then hurries to the door and starts smoking because she was a bit anxious. At the basketball game, the packed gym was going wild supporting its team as the commentators narrate the game for the cheering crowd. Suddenly, a call comes through and Faye connects it directly to Everett, who answers immediately. The polite caller introduces his name as Billy, and Everett transfers Billy to the air after making sure that he understands that swear words or inappropriate stories were not allowed on air. Billy informs Everett that he wants to tell a story that was related to the signal that Everett had put out in the air. Billy begins his story by telling the audience that he was in the military and that there were always jobs and work that the soldiers didn't really know much about. Curious, Everett asks him what he's talking about. Billy explains this by saying that they would be assigned to places without knowing where they were to do things none of them understood, which was normal in the military. One night, Billy was woken up by his superior and he had Billy get into a uniform and report for duty. Then a carrier plane landed and Billy was told to get on it by himself. They made several more stops and picked up other men, and they flew for at least 2 hours. When they landed, they were loaded into a bus with windows that were painted black so that nobody knew where they were going. When they arrived, it was just deserts and flatlands, but there were tents and tunnels and underground bunkers. Billy and other men were briefed by an officer Billy had never seen before, and he tells them that everything that they were seeing was classified, and if they spoke about it, it would endanger America. Billy and the other men were sent to a rocky, sandy alcove where they were ordered to start digging a square hole. They build walls of blocks and concrete floor, and they build windows that connected to a viewing room and ventilation. The officers had them sleeping in that room, which was filled with different kinds of war supplies, which were all underground. One morning, they wake up and report for duty and saw something enormous in the hole, covered in a trap. No one was allowed to see it, but it looked smooth and broken on some parts. Everett asks the caller if he thought it was American, to which Billy answers that there was no way to know. Billy tells Everett that they weren't allowed to ask questions, but simply had to trust their superiors. He confesses that that particular project worried him because it was very secretive, and curious, Everett asks Billy what happened next. Billy tells Everett that they carefully built a roof over the object, and when they were done making them build stuff, they hauled them all on a plane, and when they were about to take off, the radio started making the same sound that Everett aired on the radio. He asks Billy if he was sure, but Billy was adamant, saying that he could never forget that sound. Once the plane started to take off, Billy and the other men looked out the window and saw people down there covering up the place with a bunch of sand as if it's never been there before. After Billy returned home, he got really sick. In the following weeks, he developed a lung condition that makes it difficult for him to breathe till this day. Billy thinks that the desert sand or radiation caused him to have this condition because he'd never been sick before that incident. Billy had spent some time in the military hospital where he met one of the other men that's been working with him on the project. He asked the man if he got sick after the mission, and the man also told him that he did, telling him that it was the second time that he was picked up for something like this. The man tells Billy about a night where he was commissioned in Nevada and he was taken to the Colorado River. The river barge was carrying something twice its size down the river, and when they got several hours down the river, there was a makeshift station where they unloaded the cargo to 2 army trucks. When the men finished loading it onto the trucks, the same sound that they heard that night also went through all of the radios. The man tells Billy that the trucks faded into the night and the sound also went with them. The man had asked around and found another man who knew just pieces of the puzzle as well. Billy tells Everett that this was the way of the military and why they recruited people from all over the country so people can have very limited information. As an answer to Everett's question of whether the signal was military, Billy tells them that after asking around, the man had told him that it wasn't military or from any other country. It was actually coming from thousands of feet higher than anything that they can climb. Everett asks for further explanation, but before Billy can elaborate, the line between the two men gets disconnected. Everett asks Faye what happened, and she tells him that they lost Billy and that it's been happening all night. Even though Everett tells Faye to try to connect them again, she was unable to because the call came from a long distance. While Everett and Faye try to figure out how to reach the caller, the phone rings and Billy was on the other line. Faye immediately connects him to Everett, who asks him for his real number. Billy tells Everett that he can't do that, and Billy understands that he cannot be put on air unless Everett can verify if what he was telling them was the truth. He confesses to Everett that he was telling them the truth, and because he was old and sick, he feels like nobody listens to him. When Everett asks why Billy feels that way, Billy tells him that it was because he was black. Billy explains that everyone on these details were black or a person of color, and that he is sure that it was done on purpose because no one takes colored folks seriously. Billy tells Everett that a friend of his managed to record the signal and sent copies to him and others who worked on the same projects. One of the tapes was given to a member of the Air Force in Cayuga who was now deceased. Faye is sure that the deceased man's wife had sent all of his tapes to a library as donation, so she steals a bicycle and hurries to a local library to steal the tapes. When she has the tapes, she hurries out and finds Everett waiting for her outside with a stolen car, and they rush back to the studio so they can ask Billy which of the tapes the recordings was on. But before he could answer them, the line disconnects. Everett decides to try all the tapes one by one until he finds the right one. He plays the sound over the radio and announces that if anyone else had any idea what the sound was, they should give him a call. While the sound continues playing, the lights start to flicker and then completely go out. Faye and Everett race to the switchboard office, where Faye receives numerous reports of something in the sky. Outside the building, they meet Gerald and Bertsy, who have been driving in pursuit of the same unidentified flying object. Faye hurries back to the switchboard, and when she hears another call come in, on the line, an elderly woman named Mabel calls and offers to provide more information about what Billy had said, but only if they come to her house. Everett and Faye go to Mabel's home, where they find her reciting a message in an unknown language. With Everett recording their conversation, Mabel tells them a story of a train that's been found completely empty and assures them that it was attacked by Indians. Days later, a woman was found battered and dehydrated, and she was taken in by a kind family. At night, in her sleep, she would be heard muttering the same thing that Mabel had been reciting earlier. A few days later, a woman crawled out of a window and stole a horse and disappeared. Mabel tells them that when she was young, she fell in love with a man named Claude and had a child out of wedlock. He went away for work, promising that he'd come back, but he never did. When her child was born, she named him Halus, and a few months later, as the child slept in her arms, he started making sounds, which were the same ones that the confused woman had been making. One night, when Halus was about 4 years old, the weather suddenly got very windy. There was a sound like a very large windmill, and Halus stared at the window, standing completely still until Mabel read the words he muttered in his sleep. When she finished, he opened his eyes and continued playing, assuring Mabel that it was something outside that usually talks to him on nights like that. And when Halus was 9, he walks out of the front door and vanishes. Mabel claims that the phenomenon seen across town are spaceships piloted by aliens who use their messages to hypnotize and abduct humans. She believes that the aliens will target isolated people while most of the town was at the basketball game, and suspects that the aliens are responsible for sowing conflict in humanity from alcoholism to war. And Mabel asks Everett to take him with her to an alien ship to be reunited with her son who was abducted years ago. Everett's not convinced with Mabel's story and tells Faye that they should go. Mabel then gives them a piece of paper where she wrote the words that she was reciting earlier. Faye runs to her house and picks up her sister Maddie, and she then hurries to Gretchen's house to pick up her father's camera. At the switchboard building, Everett along with Faye and Maddie are picked up by Gerald and Bertsy after Faye speaks to her cousin, who tells her that she's seen a round flying object in the sky. Everett plays the recording of Mabel reciting the alien message, sending Gerald and Bertsy into a trance and nearly causing them to crash. After the incident, Everett and Faye panic and flee into the woods, while Faye still carries Maddie. The trio make their way through the woods and find trees and branches that have been burned. They see a large opening overhead as though the object has crashed through, and Everett finally acknowledges that the aliens must be real and must be lurking nearby. Scared, Faye and Everett start running until they reach a clearing, and exhausted, the two take a moment to catch their breaths, but are shocked when they see a flying saucer hovering nearby. They watch in awe as the spacecraft rejoins a massive mothership in the sky, and the wind starts to swirl around them until they disappear from sight. At the high school, the crowd leaves the basketball game, but Everett, Faye, and Maddie are gone, and the only thing that remains is their footprints in that tape recorder.